Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today I have Leon from Type Tips. And so,
Yes,
would you like to tell us a bit about you?
maybe Leon from Type Tips.
Yeah.
Yes,
His identity is a mystery.
yes, I am definitely an INFP. I'm not sure if I'm Leon though. Just let you know.
Ooh,
I,
you were replaced. You
I am replaced. Yes,
Yeah. Leon actually has a twin brother that's holding him hostage in a potato bag right now while he does the interview.
with his permission.
While you're such a polite hostage holder.
Exactly.
Cool. And so go check out Type Tips. I'll have it located below. His videos are splendid and funny, just like he is. And if you want some NE humor, plus this lovable face right here, I pointed to myself when I said then go
I
ahead.
basically copy and paste Joyce's face onto mine on my channel.
That's really perturbing and disturbing. And so, Leon, would you like to tell us a bit about your experience with Introverted Feeling, FI?
My experience with introverted feeling. Well, I feel like INFPs are very internal people. So when I talk with other INFPs, they kind of are very much into their internal processes um, when they talk. So introvert feeling is um, how I express it personally. I feel like, for example, like when I sing, there is kind of this kind of a rawness that kind of arises within. So when I hear like extrovert feelers sing, is also they're very good. They're very like there's something like cultivated in how they sing in general. Whereas um also another thing's like when I observe like INFPs like laugh, for example, it kind of almost seems like it's like it kind of like spontaneously just kind of like erupts a bit, and then it's it's like the words we use cannot really portray what we're experiencing so well. And maybe that's more so for like an ISFP, but because I think extrovert intuition is a bit linguistic, so it has a greater expression. But introvert feeling kind of it has no words for it.
Yeah, Introverted Feeling is a languageless function. So you can
Mhm.
try to bring it out, but it's never going to be as rich as it is within your own inner contents.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, and how I experience it too is, um, I guess one way is kind of getting a feeling with people, like kind of with people and also with objects as well. There's kind of like this kind of um, paying attention to the attraction to things and also repulsion, which everyone has, but I think we're more sensitive to it. So actually, I think everyone experiences this, but like INFPs kind of are more conscious of the process in themselves and others. Same thing with other types and their functions, like their dominant function. I think they're more aware of how like that is being expressed. For example, like extrovert feelers would be more aware of how the emotional environment is, and there doesn't have to be like an extrovert feeler in the environment, right? But they know if they if one if the environment is a particular kind of way, then people are influenced in a certain kind of way. So they're just more aware of the process.
Absolutely. Well put. And so FI is very attuned to the visceral reactions you have to things. Everyone has them, but FI is a little more, has a meter for it a little bit more. Judging,
So like I'll give you an example, like with philosophy or with the ideas, INTPs are very focused on the technicalities of it. I could be very I could pay attention to when ideas are presented, um, kind of what people's reactions would be. It's in that way it's kind of similar to extrovert feeling in a way. Like
Mhm.
how would they take the words? Like um how are they influenced emotionally internally by the words. So it's not like we're the only ones. It's just that we're just paying attention to the process.
Absolutely. And so with introverted feeling, you can see it in music too. So
Hmm.
if you search up Fiona Apple, I believe she's an INFP, or Phoebe Bridgers, I believe she's an ENFP. There are good examples of how NFPs approach songwriting and musicalness, if that's a word. Now it is a word. And anything else you'd like to add to FI before we move to NE?
Not for now. We could always go back to a function and talk about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you want to tell me about your goofy side? Any?
My, extrovert intuition. So
Mhm.
I think when types kind of present themselves, what they're most obviously is they're their first function and their third function. So when you look at ESTP, you just see like SC and you see FE, right?
Yeah.
And then like the second function is there. It doesn't express itself as much. It's more cautious. So usually like a type can be identified because they're usually expressing the first three functions, and then the first and third one the most, right? Um, so how extroversion expresses itself is that I could very quickly get the big picture behind something. I could read behind the lines, so between the lines. So uh, when things show up on TV, and I think it could be like something like news. And for me, there's something, if you know, like it's very serious, I see something funny about it, like because I see the greater context of it. It's like this is amusing how they're presenting this, and they're presenting this because they're viewing the world in this kind of a funny way, right? So like I feel like when I talk with other extrovert intuitives, this is like a very natural thing. Like we're kind of like seeing the bigger context, so we kind of like it's as if the world's kind of playing and people are kind of like taking it kind of seriously, but then we just see some like a very amusing angle on it, and we say haha that's funny, but then people don't see it. Everyone's like surprised that we're like picking these kind of things out.
Yeah. I always have any users pulling my leg with name tags like maybe Leon.
Yes.
Yeah. I find sometimes they also like to understand ideas by bouncing them with other people too and crystallizing them with other people
Right,
with some NPs.
right. And it seems so people get this idea that extroversion is about like you're social with people, but with extrovert intuition doesn't necessarily have to be that way. It's an internal process. So meaning in um, intuition and feeling are very subjective processes in general, and
Mhm.
then they're both abstract in their own way. Um,
Mm.
they're less objective. So when I guess a lot of extrovert intuitive types they think that they're like introvert intuitive, for instance, because they
Yeah.
said there's something like subjective about it. It's mental processing. You don't have to be talking with somebody necessarily, but it is like a Christmas tree of ideas of um, a lot of different things are object like yeah, you could say objectively possible, right? But it feels subjective because it's occurring inside your own mind.
Yeah. Brilliantly put, Leon.
And another way it's expressed, it's kind of it feels like an openness. So like if you meet someone who's an ENTP or ENFP, INTP or INFP, it kind of feels like they're like receptive in a way. Like they're just like just just kind of like completely open.
Mm-hmm. NE is an openness with ideas and concepts, and
Hmm.
SE is an openness with every new experience.
Hmm.
And so these extroverted perceiving functions deal with openness in slightly different ways.
Right.
One's with the physical world, and is with the conceptual and abstract world.
Yeah, I think so. Because I recently went to a showing of the Rocky Horror film, and
Mhm.
and then it is showing people show up in their costumes and there's all these props, and then for instance, during the film, they might tell you to throw some confetti or to take a water bottle, water gun, and to spray the water gun to mimic the rain that's happening in the film.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something like very essy about it. It's like everything's like very edgy.
Mm-hmm.
That it's kind of like disturbing. Like the film itself, and also like the whole experience of going to the film. I mean, I like it. I have an openness to it. I guess like kind of like in an intellectual kind of way, but I definitely see that as like an SC thing. That's like more of expert sensors. Hmm.
Fantastic.
Hmm.
And so, Leon, what is your experience of introverted sensing?
Introvert sensing. I think people are like very focused on their first and third function. That's like they're kind of it's kind of like a default mode. Um, so that's what they're focused. So what introvert feeling, introvert sensing have in common is like kind of like this nonverbal internal process. They're
Mm-hmm.
very much into the process, like process meaning a very visceral kind of experience. So when you look at like an ENTP or ENTJ, so ENTP, their strongest function is extrovert intuition, and then the ENTJ is extrovert thinking. And this is I'm talking in regards to socionics that both of them are actually strong at extrovert intuition, extrovert thinking. These both, and then so they're very fast. They're very fast, and very fast intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
And what they really struggle with is like with a internal visceral process. So often, like because I work as a psychotherapist, is what they kind of complain about is that they don't feel like they're actually like internally engaging with something.
Mm-hmm.
It's all like very fast intellectual activity. Like
Yeah.
they understand something I think the lighting here has gotten weird for some reason.
It's okay. You just look like you're gonna get adopted by an
An
angelic.
alien. An alien abduction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But anyway, whatever. I don't have like an ISTP here helping me out with all the lighting, so I can't really do anything about it. But extrovert intuition, extrovert thinking is very like it's fast intellectual. So you could say that our focus, like as INFPs, is on like an internal visceral processing, even though we're not actually strong at introvert sensing. So we're actually lacking that ability to really tap into that, but we try very hard to.
Mm. Makes sense. Makes sense.
Hmm.
And how is your experience of extroverted thinking, T?
How's my experience of extrovert?
You're
I'm
having
trying
a
to figure out the light.
TV
Uh,
malfunction right now.
yes, with extrovert thinking. Um, with extrovert thinking, mm, so extrovert thinking is like very focused on the it's very much focused on the goals, right? Very focused on kind of having a kind of a makeshift way to be able to just get things going and running, focusing on how to get to the first step and second step. Um, so I feel like when I tap into this function, I I earn a pair of legs. Like before, I'm just like in one spot, like um, not very. I mean, it always feels like there's something like lacking in life, but then like when expert thinking is developed, I feel like it's like I could actually move forward, or there's breathing. So usually the relationship with expert thinking is kind of like a love hate relationship with INFP. So how I see it is that types they tend to be very um, they tend to be very initially repelled by their inferior function. So like usually when I talk with INFJs, the first thing they're complaining about, especially like in a city like New York, is like, oh, it's noisy and people are pushing each other around. I need something that's quieter, more tranquil. So they complain about expert sensing. Um, so like because I mentioned this because I feel like socionics is a really good theory. They talk about 8 functions, but a lot of people are like very theoretical about it. A lot of
Mhm.
people are very theoretical about type. But if you have actual experiences with types, it's very different. So people feel like if you read sociologics, you're in love with their dual, which is their opposite. So that for INFP, that's ESTJ. I mean, that certainly is possible, but usually in my experience with literally looking at different types, that is not a common pairing, and usually usually a bit fraught too, unless there may be a certain level of development or whatever the case may be.
Mm.
So so it's not a love relationship. I feel like when I hear extrovert thinking, I kind of make sure there's no like ENTJs or ESTJs here. I'm kind of like zoning out. I'm not paying attention to it. So it's not like in sociology they say like you love it. You're always like you're craving it. That's how it's experienced. I see people like INTPs too, like with extrovert feelings, like they don't understand the significance of extrovert feeling. Like I could understand the significance of extrovert feeling more in a way, at least on on a more regular basis. They probably understand extrovert feeling at a more meta basis than I do. But like at a date, like kind of like a moment to moment basis, INTP's extrovert feeling, like they don't like get why things may be phrased a certain kind of way that extrovert feelers do with a lot of expression and not um, so for them that it doesn't contain a lot of content, right? But I see more of the content of it. So the same thing with extrovert thinking. So I imagine like an INTP could see the purpose of this, like this information. It feels like it just feels like to me all this like random like detailed knowledge, right? It's not like you're not like and you're not like really piecing together. I mean, I don't even know how to describe it. It's just not like very appealing, right? But
Mm.
what happens is that um there's almost more of like initial resistance, but then there's a bit of a draw into it, meaning you get kind of like sucked into it. So the more you kind of work on something, the more, like if you work on a project or something you care about, the more the inferior function kind of like takes over a bit. So
Mm.
it becomes like almost like an obsession. Like it kind of, then that becomes a thing, right?
Mm.
Then I could be like, for me, obsessively working or like very much paying attention to inefficiency. So you probably then hear like INFPs. Like I feel like people have some sort of, they do have a fixation with their inferior function in that they kind of like see it lacking in their environment, and then they're trying to and then so like for me that would be like seeing inefficiencies like
Mhm.
primarily as and at a meta level. So the inferior functions more kind of meta, right? So everyone's like more meta when it comes to the inferior function. They're not good at managing it on a day-to-day basis, but they get to see it very much at a meta level. Whether this this idea is very accurate or not, it's hard to say. Um, so kind of like going on a random tangent here, with like Kant, for example, his, if you see the basis of his philosophy as an INTP, that's extrovert feelings, how people treat one another, right? So that becomes like the fixation, like at a meta level. So for INFPs, that would be like a fixation with the effectiveness or the in efficiencies of things and how things can go smoother if these things are addressed.
Mm.
Maybe I'm still trying to debate this in my head, whether we actually see it accurately or not. But I
Mm.
think, of course, it becomes unhealthy as an obsession.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It can also come out in the form of these surprising moments where FPs will have these sharp, blunt things that they'll say, and people are like, "Wow, I was not expecting that to come out of this person."
It comes off as like Carl Jung calls it like a petty tyranny. So that's kind of just how I see X-ray thinking.
Yeah. Some of the other ways it can come out too is it can be hard to be fully TE into something if your values or your FI is not into it. So,
Yeah, exactly. It needs that valid. like it needs to be validated by the first function. The first function as you look at the first. I look at the first function as almost like it's like a project manager, right? Kind of ironic piece. That's like extrovert thinking in a way, right? But it's like it manages the day to day kind of stuff, but in a way it kind of it's not it's not as meta as the inferior function in some sort of way. It's kind of
Mm,
I probably would have a hard time describing it right now.
cool. And so, how can you find beauty in everything, and is that possible?
How can you find beauty in everything, and is that possible? So, well, like when I hear this question, I kind of think about this Japanese art form. I think, um, and this Japanese art form is based on the idea that imperfection is beautiful. And so it's often, so I'll give you an example of the art. It's if you take a pot, they don't like to have a perfect pot. They want pots with cracks in them. And then with the cracks, they fill the cracks with gold. And so it's symbolic of life itself,
Mm-hmm.
in that if there are negative experiences, you find what life is about is weaving those negative experiences into your life. It's almost like in improv, you're always saying yes and, right? So any single time we're rejecting experience, we have that determination something is beautiful or not beautiful. Then that's like that causes us to be in resistance to life. So there is beauty in everything when we could take a step back and we really take a look at it. I'll give you an example. Just give me 1 second. I'll be right here in a jiffy.
Sure. Such a NF concept.
So I'm back after our commercial break, and we have like in this painting I made. There was one time I could feel like when I'm making this painting that I am rushing. So if you see around my hand, there's a lot of purple. And when I made that purple, it was actually initially very, very ugly. And I knew why that happened is because I was not in the zone. I was in a state of desperation. And when we get into the state of desperation, that's when we start to make these so-called mistakes. But instead of seeing it as a mistake, after I spent this time making this purple stuff, which maybe felt like a waste of time, and said, why did I not allow myself to be in the zone? I decided to integrate it. So I take the purple, which should not have been there, and I painted over it, and you still see the purple inside. And that's kind of like how I see life. It's kind of like you're weaving in experiences. So you take what's ugly in your life, and so long as you're bringing it in, almost like in improv, you're saying yes and to have experience, that makes everything in life beautiful.
Yeah, to embrace all of the good, the bad, and the ugly, and seeing it as a part of the picture, and
Yes.
filling it in with gold, as you were
Yes.
saying. There's always a way.
To get back to extra thinking, I think one thing, and is my sound okay, by the way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, all right. With extra thinking, I feel like when I integrate the idea of practicality or pragmatics, then I feel like my life it feels a bit wholer. So again, I'm against that very theoretical notion in sociology that you just love your inferior function. Actually, I find usually INFPs are kind of like ignoring of practicality, pragmatic, or they don't see it as important.
Yeah.
And then you have the INFPs and then they start to fixate it on that. That becomes the only thing. So meaning there's other INFPs where everything like it's almost as if they're less idealistic than even than like an expert thinking dominant. because they think like I'm so limited by all these factors. Like I'm I'm this old in life. I mean, I feel like everyone has these kind of thoughts, like I'm this old in life and I only could get this much done. But I think like INFPs could be so focused on the more metric aspects of that. And then so they lost touch with their idealism. Or like maybe like some INFPs, maybe they see like a purpose to capitalism and then they get sucked into it and they kind of like forget who they are. So that's one thing. But usually what's the case is that we don't see the practicality as important. It bites us in the butt, and afterwards we start to if you recognize the value of it, but keep it in mind. So the way I work with expert thinking is to look at it this way. Like often we look at a very meta level. If you start to look at like your first function, like how you could use expert thinking in your day to day, like kind of like a more managerial level, then it becomes then you start to develop. And unless you think about it as a meta level, like this is how the world should be, then that's better when you stop thinking that way.
Yeah. With the INFPs, their heart of type, or some people would call it temperament or essential motivator, is NF. And
Hmm.
the counter to that is ST. And that could be the TE as well. And it's the pragmatics can be something that some of them struggle with. Or
Hmm.
for some of them, the other ones, hyperfixate at, because when you're bad at something, you might want to become over good at it because you're like,
Hmm.
I don't want it to control my life.
Hmm. Yes, exactly.
Cool. And so, how do you deal with fifth slot FE and NI critic? How do you deal with me, Leon?
By engaging in conversation. So actually, like the more you tap into this, the more you could communicate with types that very much value this function. So, like, for example, like me communicating with Joyce as an INFJ, for example, if I could understand where, and this goes with every other function, if we could understand where it's coming from, like what its purpose is, um, then you lessen that automatic reaction. So often we have an automatic reaction to functions. So if it's with extroverted feeling, there could be if there's too much of it, there could be like a we're repelled by it, for instance. But if you could understand it, you could put it into context, then you lessen that kind of automatic grip. Or not, you don't necessarily make you don't necessarily get rid of the automatic reaction to it, but you you're mindful of it. So the idea is that you become mindful of the functions. You say, aha, I notice there's extra feeling there, and I could respond differently to, or I can have a different perspective on it, right?
Hmm.
So I think the key thing is not to like reverse your type or try to like completely re-engineer your type. I think that's maybe something I've tried to do before. It's not like it isn't really work, but to really understand the functions and see where they're coming from. Um, so if you the thing is, people feel like if you kind of understand or develop the other functions, that may be too much of a burden because this is kind of like extra feeling and extra intuition kind of taps more into the shadow. But actually, in the long run, it saves energy because every single time that you're presented with extra feeling, instead of like being like exhausted by it, you could at least know where it's coming from, right? And you could also respond in a way that some types could appreciate. Some types need more extra feeling signal, such as like an ESTP. Like if you uh, present positively in a very extra feeling form, then they can understand it. Otherwise, yeah, you have to kind of like look at things from their perspective. Like they're not able to pick out certain kind of signals that you're using with introverted feeling. If that makes
Mm,
sense.
100%, Leon.
Mhm.
There's this piece of writing in the Facebook group, Personality Typology for Self-Growth. And this is some INFP's experience of extroverted feeling in a quote. So, social consensus disappoints me and can often unfairly hurt people. I'm usually asking myself if I approve of the social consensus and not the other way around. And so some INFPs might experience that type of questioning, rebellious approach to FE.
Right. Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's how to look at extrovert feeling. I think it's interesting because I think like for instance, the relationship between ENTPs and INFJs, which is like so like famous, right? Is actually it's the same thing with INFPs and ESFJs as well. I think the INFJ ENTP happens to be like the famous one, but it's like it's the same setup. So there's a certain kind of a way those types could resonate. So yeah, I mean, I actually think with the fifth function, like extrovert feeling, there would be an attraction to that. So there's an attraction to extrovert feeling, and also people are usually attracted to if you share the middle two letters, but not the end, the book end letters. So like INFP, ENFJ. Usually when you have a types like that, there is usually an automatic admiration.
Mm.
It's only like after knowing that person over time, it's like, oh, that person's like a piece of shit. Like, but after it's like only after no, like as individuals. So there's going to be ENFJs that like after assessment, you know, you see good qualities and other ones maybe not, right? But I think because of the initial presentation as ENFJ, right, it's like, oh, there's a mutual admiration, like there's something very impressive about how ENFJs are NF but in the other direction.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
oftentimes see NFJs and NFPs either being together romantically or
Mhm.
as friends.
Mhm.
And there's common relationship dynamics between them too.
Mhm.
Namely, they're really attracted to each other in the beginning.
Mhm.
But something that might happen is NFPs are sometimes really private about their most precious emotions. So and what might happen is the NFJ might try to pull out emotions because they want to see it to confirm that you feel that way. And so you'll have this push and
Right, right.
pull relationship sometimes with these two
Ye
types.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's certainly yeah, that's certainly the case.
Cool. And so, hello, Joyce and Leon. Thank you for doing this live. Being people who share no functions with each other, what NF stereotype traits are present and observable in both of you? So, Leon, flash your NFness at us.
So, like, okay, so I'm gonna try to stereotype myself. Let's see, being people okay, no functions, what NF traits are present observable? Um, I think well, I mean, we look at INFPs, like, it's usually the focus is on introverted feeling. So like there's that a bit of like wistfulness, right? I
Mhm.
feel like INFJs also have a wistfulness, but there is kind of like it's more in the background. It's not like a focus, right? And also I look at extrovert feeling as kind of a bit of a external kind of charisma that's a bit smooth. So why don't we go to Joyce since you could answer this first? How you think about it?
The
And then
question is what we share in common, and your automatic response is how we read different. And
oh,
it's
did I misread that? Uh, oh, okay, I did. So are present and observable in both of you. I feel like when I'm talking with I feel like out of actually probably out of all types, if I'm talking with an INFJ, there is a deep level of understanding in that we speak a similar language. So in sociotics, our strongest functions are introvert intuition, introvert feeling. So when we talk about this stuff, it it's there's a really quick understanding of it. so I don't have to explain a lot of different kind of things. So I mean, there's resonance with ENFJs and ENFPs that I have, but not so much in that same sense because their focus is on extrovert intuition, extrovert feeling,
Mm,
and that's like a different kind of way of looking at the world.
uh-huh. Yeah. Something I find very NFy about you, Leon, is when we're together, you ask really deep questions, actually.
Hmm.
There's some extroverted intuition to it, too, because sometimes I think you're just playfully curious in an explorative way. So you ask me questions. But it's also, NFs are really good at intimacy gathering. So figuring out information about you that is most intimate to your soul
Right.
quicker than most people. And that's what makes Leon such a great psychotherapist. Cough,
Yeah.
cough.
Well, there's some that's kind of like what I mean with the like kind of like the NIFI focus. I think that's what that basically is kind of like getting to the depths of feeling and the depths of intuition. So basically someone's soul
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
or like deeper meaning.
Yeah. And it's intense and nice.
Hmm.
With the N NFs, maybe there's, okay, this is pure conjecture, a predisposition for some of them towards depression and anxiety
Hmm.
because of that FI-NI strength. Because when you see the depths of the human psyche, it's also a little bit depressing sometimes too.
It is, yes.
Yeah. Or it can,
Yeah.
yeah. Or you secretly always crave depth, but you're not sure where to find it. And so
Right.
you just like to ask people intrusive questions.
Well, that's relatable. Except asking people intrusive questions. I think that's like extra feeling in a way. Um, so, um, yeah. So another similarity, INFJ and INFP, is that um, our weakest functions would be extrovert sensing and extrovert thinking. So that's basically taking action upon the world, being like someone who's like um, just like in the world itself. But I also think that this is where INFPs and INFJs also bond over because that becomes like a fixation. So like
Mm.
so for INFJs and INFP, the fixation is about how do I take action in the world compared to other types. Whereas they kind of like that's more of like an incidental thing that they do because they're already kind of strong at it, right? Or if it's like ESTP or ESTJ, that's the main mode of operating. They're kind of like project manager role day to
Mm,
day. So that's not like a meta fixation.
absolutely. Yeah. Well put. Well put. And so, how do you feel about memories or regret in terms of introverted sensing?
Memories or regret. Um, I think I like to almost like obsessively look at um, my past, like kind of like in a personal past, like kind of like more of like an FISI kind of thing. It's kind of like a way to experience almost like a sense of relief, right? Because the third function is like a relaxation kind of function.
Yeah.
So I don't know if maybe other types do this too. I'm just talking from my personal experiences that when I'm reading and rereading my journal over and over again, it has like a soothing effect because it and that's kind of like how I deal with regret because I find that regret is often comes from our current perspective of the past, and the other thing is we're kind of like placing or forcing our current values onto the past. Um, but it's that's hard to tell whether that's introvert sensing. I feel like that's actually kind of like a universal human theme. So the universal human theme is kind of like I wish I knew what I know now, and basically when it comes to that theme, we're kind of we think that every way that we have experienced the past with all its different diversity of perspectives and experiences must conform with our current perspective in the present. But your current perspective and perspective is only this point in time. Eventually in the future you'll have other ones. and then and everything is being evaluated in regards to this current perspective. And you can imagine that's actually a very stifling view of life. So you could trust, like, in the future, you're going to have a different perspective. You're going to understand things in the past and be able to put it into place in your own life.
Mm-hmm.
And really, the point of growth is shifting from one perspective to another. Like, I'm developing better perspectives over time that help me to handle life better. And then where that regret comes from is like when we're stuck with one perspective and think that's how life should be.
Mm. Yeah. And that combination of FI, SI makes a lot of INFPs good poets or good with writing. If you
Mhm,
visit Leon's website, cough, cough, it has his writing pieces there, and they're really, really darn good. They
mhm,
get you to introspect more when you read an INFP's writing on something. It is so human, organic, and relatable to people because when you capture a human emotion, you're able to make it universal because all experiences are universal. And
mhm,
so when you read it, it's so rich with reflection that, with everyone kind of feels like they get their recharge time or introversion time by reading an INFP's introspection. It is gold. It's like if you steal treasure from a pirate, that's exactly how it's like to read an INFP's writing.
mhm. So yeah, be sure to steal some treasure from me, and we're gonna take this very human material and shamelessly promote it. So I'm gonna tell everyone you could find it at leonsouththerapy.com.
Yeah. Cool. I'll have it located below too. And so, with those similarities that can confuse others between INFP and INFJ, what can be the clear differences to help distinguish between the types? So, one of the differences you can apply is fully baked versus half baked. So, all of our introverted functions are fully baked, and all of our extroverted functions are a little half baked. So with INFPs, they're actually going to be fully baked with their FI and their feelings. And so sometimes they won't want to show it until it's fully processed. So they might need to go off on their own to fully understand it before they want you to intrude on that process. And with their extroverted intuition and INFPs, they might just blah something out to throw an amusing perspective out there, but it might be half baked because that's where the fun is. It's in baking it together. NE likes to get baked together.
Mhm,
And so
yeah.
with the INFJ will want to fully bake their NI alone. So they want their insights to be crystallized by themselves, and they want to get to a central theme or a central idea before they even show it. So it has to be fully processed before they present an idea out. And with INFJs, it's their FE that's half baked. And so they're going to show their emotions in a half baked state because they want to bake it together. And so it's like, what part of you wants to bake the cake with another person and interact with the world around you? And what part of the cake would you like to bake alone first and then present it fully baked? That's a
Mhm.
weird way of putting it, but that's one of the ways.
Yeah, yeah. So Joyce put it pretty well. The introvert functions are the things you really want to distill, and really you want to distill down to, I guess, almost like perfection, especially if it's the first function and it's not ready for others until it's been fully a process. And even when it gets expressed before it's fully processed, it feels inauthentic. And I so with the introvert functions, they have a feeling that the extrovert functions being inauthentic. So like
Mhm.
for me, that's would be extrovert feeling. For Joyce, that would be extrovert intuitions. Like if I'm presenting like idea, and and then Joyce says, "Yeah, you don't like fully believe in that." It's like, no, I just like throwing it out there. And then like the same thing with feelings. With maybe with extroverts, maybe they view like the introvert as like being like dishonest. Like you're not like sharing what's there. So there's not like a transparency.
Yeah. there's a privacy to introverted functions,
Hmm.
even when they think they're being a full book. Like, it's
Hmm.
the introverted function can go like, I think I'm being an open book, and then everyone around them's like, you showed me like one word on your 200-page book.
Hmm.
And so with introverted functions, you really have to ask the right questions to get at they're really trying. They won't even want to express it, because expressing it almost feels like butchering the introverted function, because you're always going to explain it in a half state. The externalized version is never as pure as the internal version within your mind. And so Katie asks, who are you without the functions? And what are the functions without you? Is there anything without the other?
So what are you without the functions, and what are the functions without you? Is there anything without the other? Let's see. So I feel like people are a lot of things outside of their functions. So you can see like functions as what we're filtering our personalities through, but personality could be anything. So one INFJ is going to be very different from another INFJ, and one INFP is going to be very different from another INFP. But you always see these filters. And the very fact that even when I say something, you could identify that as introvert feeling or extrovert intuition. There's with any sentence I say, there's like 100 different possibilities of where that's coming from, right? It could come from like some sort of past experience that I have, right? Or from my own insight that I've garnered throughout my own life, and also other personality traits that I have. But it gets filtered and expressed through FI and NE.
Yay, that is true. So your personality is like a skeleton, or comparable to your dominant hand and your non-dominant hand. It's just a fact about you, where you could write with your non-dominant hand, so your less preferred functions. But for some people, that turns into squiggly lines and a less clear signature. And so it shows what your inherent preference is, but it doesn't show where you will turn up. So if your environment requires something different than you, so you could turn out entirely different than what your preferences have you as, if you have a weird alter rating factor, a moderating variable. So that's always something to keep to touch. But your functions or your preferences are as innate to you as your skeleton within your body. So I imagine you not having your functions akin to you not having the bone structure within your body. You just be kind of a blob.
So that's their answer. So basically, the answer to all these questions, these three questions, is that you'll be a blob.
Yes, yes. Imagine Ditto from Pokemon, you will be that without your functions.
Which is not bad.
It's not bad, yeah. How do you feel about values?
How do I feel about values?
Yeah.
I think um, feeling itself gets construed with values. So I feel like thinking types have as many values as feeling types. It might get expressed in a different way, I guess. So as an example, like I think like a stereotype from socionics, which maybe I have thought maybe was true in the past, was like ENTPs, because they're FI polar, there's no ethics, right? But actually, through my real experiences with ENTPs, they actually tend to very much emphasize that. What if I don't know, it's like a tertiary extrovert feeling expression, but like for ENTPs, they it tends to, like, when there's a value being crossed, they tend to express it very, very strongly, like kind of like more than other types. Like they kind of like get like very upset. Um, and I still have to kind of figure out where it's coming from. But basically, I think all types have values, and maybe they just kind of like they process it in different kinds of ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so with NE, extroverted intuition, it loves extrapolating stuff. So
Mhm.
Leon's like pulling from these different models and his own thoughts to create like these really interesting perspectives on types that people may
Mhm.
not normally talk about. So that's cool. Forgotten Clown asks, "Hello, how do you feel about the use of TI and SC?" We're going to turn you into a temporary STP, Leon.
Yeah. Well, I feel like when I'm talking with an ICP and or an INTP, I get into a certain kind of zone because we're both introvert judges. So we're both kind of very much clarifying an internal world, and and so there's a certain kind of resonance. Like we could kind of understand each other in that regards. Um, so introvert thinking. So I don't necessarily like the idea of like. I mean, I feel like saying that there's valued functions or non-valued functions is a bit of a oversimplification. It's I think maybe the first four functions are more um, core to what makes up the type structure. But like when it comes to introverted thinking, it's not like I'm like repelled by it or anything like that. But and I tend to like compared to extrovert thinking. Extrovert thinking, I'm more. It's easier for me to process introvert thinking kind of material. If it's,
Mm,
but I also think it's something that could be trained up. So actually, I look if I were to look into my life and I looked at my writing, say like back in high school, it's a lot more emo. So there's not a lot of like TI kind of content, but afterwards, you'll, it gets developed. So like after college, it starts to show that there's a lot of like introvert thinking. It's a bit of it's a bit of a role function. So maybe like what happens is an INFP may kind of fixate a bit too much on it, just like with the
mm,
other um, introvert functions. And well, okay, so we we go to expert sensing. So expert sensing, like for an INFP, um, it could be very like repelling, I guess.
mm.
It's very shocking and it could be like very disturbing in its nature. But
Uh,
it kind of like just like with the inferior function, it takes some time to be like unlocked. So when it's unlocked, then it kind of like freely expresses itself.
mm. We're gonna throw you out of a plane and take you skydiving to unleash your SE.
Yeah,
Leon, that is
yeah.
your next.
But yeah, I think that's a tricky thing because there's also like a difference between like being a type 7 and also being expert sensing. Because
Mm,
I have some type 7 traits, so I'm more likely to take those kind of risks.
mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And so, Words with Meaning asks, INFJs often talk about what they want and organize something, and INFPs daydream a lot and almost never know what they want, and I predict. Would you confirm, disconfirm, Leon?
Okay, INFJs often talk about what they want and organize something. INFP daydream a lot and almost never knows what they want. Uh, I think there needs to be like a bit more definition, I guess, like what you mean by wanting something. Because I think INFPs are pretty usually kind of pretty obsessed with what they want.
Yeah.
And maybe like INFJs kind of get lost like when it comes to that. They kind of the FI kind of gets lost and they may be like very fixated on like the people around them, for instance. Is
Mm.
that fair to say or not?
I think it's true. I would also counter argument that and say, I notice with some INFPs, because of their extroverted intuition, they might know what their FI wants, but they don't know how to achieve it in the TE. And they can see so many things that they like. So they're like, I like this and I also like this, but I can't pick and narrow down between all of these things that I FI love. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
There's also another thing where INFPs could feel what they want. So they're clear on what it's like it's they 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 want what they want, but they don't necessarily understand it's not them, right? So intuition could probably paint a good picture of like who like someone is, for instance, and that's what they they need to be going for. right? But like with introvert feeling, if it's not like properly expressed, what you want is kind of a bit fickle in a way. It's not necessarily resonates with what your core personality is.
Makes sense. And so, concerning the you of the past that didn't know about typology language, did non-FI users frustrate or stress you out in a way?
Yes, and I think they still frustrate me. I mean, they frustrate me, but it's like with a perspective. So in a way, they frustrate me less. Yeah, I feel like it's important to know like the difference between our reactions and also how we choose to respond. Because I
Mm,
think we can't help our reactions. So when the functions play out, I'm always going to have this kind of relationship with this kind of function, right? But I think when it goes through that point or perspective of understanding, then we could choose how to respond to it. And as a result, we could be less frustrated or stressed out.
yes. Thank you, inner therapist Leon. How do you handle negative emotion? We talked about this a little bit, Leon, on your channel. Cough, cough. I'll link it below. We did a episode on how to cultivate a more emotionally secure world.
Hmm.
And one of the ways to handle negative emotions is to have a good, secure world where you feel psychologically safe to have those negative emotions. Because one of the reasons why we may not be experiencing negative emotion is the shame that comes with it culturally or within you. And so removing the shame or removing the connotation that it's weak or it's wrong to feel it helps people feel negative emotions. So
Hmm.
it's
Yeah,
realizing.
yeah, I like that point. Like, basically, that with every emotion has its own purpose, and there's no emotion that is bad. So, um, you might have a lot of techniques to be able to handle negative emotions, such as mindfulness, or you could change your thoughts using cognitive behavioral therapy. But when sometimes none of those things work, sometimes we really feel like we're in a pit, and that's kind of like what Joyce is talking about. If you could provide a emotional secure place for those emotions to be, then um, then you'll do better. So if we feel like we're trying everything, if you could kind of allow those emotions to be, allow yourself to be drawn into them, but in like a safe manner, like almost like imagine yourself to be a safe container for all these negative emotions and kind of like let them play out and know in the back of your mind that you'll be okay. You don't have to believe it, but know in the back of your mind you'll be okay. Then then the emotions will take they have a process to them and they're going to play out that process, and it's when we resist that process then they start to call out stronger.
Mm, yeah. The more you resist, the more it persists. Your emotions and a lot of things in life are like a river. You actually need to let the clean new water flow into the river and keep it moving as opposed to building a dam and keeping all the dirty water in the water. You got to let it pass. It's not good to clog things like clogging your arteries or like just clogging pipes. It just causes messes and issues, and the same principle applies for your emotions. The more you clog it and let it build up, the more unhealthy it is in general.
If your emotions are clogged up, uh, consult your local NF, and if your pipes are clogged up in your house, consult your local ST type.
That's hilarious. Yeah, you
Have
just
you seen that? Oh, if I may, have you seen that um, the show Avatar with the seven chakras? But it's basically what Joyce was talking about. Like you need like one chakra to be clear in order to move on to the next one.
yeah. So clear your chakras with your local friendly NF. We are so used to people emotionally dumping on us anyway. So
The
VS
number is 1-800.
VSS, was there ever a time in your life where you thought you were an extrovert, maybe while developing NE?
No. That's my answer. I definitely developed my any more, but I was a very shy kid. And again, I'm going by kind of like a more colloquial definition of introvert when I say this. Because I feel like there's actually a lot of ENFPs. It kind of feels like they're like in their own world too, right? And that
Mm,
they confuse that with introversion, that they
yeah.
feel separate and apart from the world. So, but like colloquially, like with that, with what introversion is, I was always like to myself. When I took the Myers-Briggs test the first time, I scored 100% on introversion. Um, Extra intuition expressed itself kind of like in quiet ways, like through quirky writing. But like aside from that, um, I think I developed my later on. I developed my expert intuition, and it kind of took some expert sensing too, because it's like kind of
Mm,
going out into the world and letting that expert perceiving go out into the world and letting my intellectual curiosity become like experiential curiosity. And
yeah.
that's when I started to like join different groups and um, develop different ideas and hobbies, and that certainly is very invigorating.
Mm. Your extroverted intuition actually makes me feel very psychologically safe because you're able to talk to me about NF stuff in a playful way, and I appreciate that, Leon. Yeah. When I take the official MBTI, I score 100% on intuition. And so when we talk about MBTI and the instrument, a lot of people conflate it with 16 personalities. They're not the same thing. One is a paid test and one is a free test, and they uh, are very different in terms of getting types right, their percentage wise. Yeah. And so, what do you think about the socialization tactic of don't make them understand you, understand them first, being an FI dom?
Oh, don't make them understand you, understand them first. Yeah, I think that's like the general strategy. um, when it comes to like our own personal world, we're very muted about it. So like I guess our whole focus is to pass the microphone to others and to, yeah, basically kind of like to understand first. I like how you call it a socializing tactic. I think it's like almost, it kind of just feels natural. But maybe it's a tactic too, because it's like a tactic of evasion.
It is, yeah, deflecting, getting everything on the other person and not on yourself.
Exactly.
It's very, very 48 laws of power of you, Leon.
Thank you.
What is your preferred way of learning, active or observational?
It's both. Um, I think I make a point on my channel to make real observations of types. So there was a phase when I had my YouTube channel where I also organized the MBTI meetup group in New York City, and that I think that's a very active form of learning, which is also pretty observational as well. I think that's also goes back to someone else's question about developing expert intuition, that reifying and realizing your curiosity, uh, that a curiosity that goes beyond just looking at what's on Wikipedia, right? Kind of like
Mm,
engaging in the world in a way. So I like to think about like George Lucas. He's an INFP and he became a famous director. And I think he had a phase in life when he was like very active in being observational, and he probably like hung out with some expert sensing characters, and
yeah.
by doing so, by engaging in the world, he's able to have a better understanding of it. It's not something that's merely in the head.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a curiosity component to NE and SE, so they're a little bit field researchy. And so, what helped you identify as a Jungian feeling dominant type?
I mean, when I read the profile for INFP, I think the first I mean, back then it was personalitypage.com, which is like an ancient website. But like that's when I first I think it's a really good website, by the way. But that's when I knew because when I took the test, I I tested between INTP and INFP, kind of like equal both. But then when I read the INFP definitions, like it's super clear. I'm using introvert feeling process. I think really reading about the cognitive functions like that, I know that's who I am. Like if I read about introvert feeling function, I am absolutely clear. Of course, the extroversion gets in the way. So I remember like in the very beginning, I was fighting that, meaning I think I could be this type or that type, whatever type, right?
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
and anything is like anything is possible. But if I really paid attention, I would know that I'm an INFP.
Mm. Yes. You are INFP.
Yes,
Is there anything in the typology community that you think desperately needs to change? If so, what would that be?
doesn't have to be as dramatic as desperately. So either I think desperate needs to change or sort of needs to change. So I think a very important one, I think this alludes to your name too. Like there's very strongly a sensing bias in typology, and there's not a very keen understanding of how sensing types develop. And it just goes to show how much we are trapped in our own worldview. Like you really, really do think in terms of your first two functions. So if
Mm.
you're intuitive, you really see things from the perspective of the value of intuition because that is your world. That's the real world. The real world is what's behind the scenes, right?
Mm.
And with sensing, what they see is just as real as. It's kind of funny. I'm saying this as an intuitive type. It should be like this should be said the other way around. That, but like but what they see is just as real and it's valid, and they're really you have to like enter into the sensing mindset to know like what the purpose of it. So I always look at like introvert sensing as sensibility.
Mm.
But as someone who has more extra intuition, I'm not looking naturally for sensibility. I'm thinking about what are the new, novel, exciting ideas out there, and let's prioritize that. But you have to really embody that sensibility mentality of introvert sensing to know its purpose. And it's hard. It's going to be very, very hard because it's always going to seem kind of like inferior. Like that's not where your focus, the world's focus should be. But I find like the more I focus on that, my worldview and also my life is more well rounded to focus on like what is sensible. Um, I think a good way to look at it is that at a certain level, every type is very fixated on their inferior function. So it could kind of look like it's expressed too much. So like sometimes when I look at ISTJs and ISFJs, they become fixated on extra intuition and it's like, well, their extra intuition is like way too crazy, right? But really, that's from my perspective. So that's probably how other people look at my extra intuition. Like it's bit like too much focus on what's kind of like weird and what's zany, right?
Mm.
Not naturally, and so that's how I put it into perspective.
Yeah. There is an intuitive bias. So oftentimes, sensors will join the community initially thinking they're intuitives, and then they learn after, oh, I'm actually a sensing type, and it takes them a while. And I agree with the overemphasis on the inferior function. You'll find with SE DOMs too, sometimes they'll identify with having really strong introverted intuition. And so they're like, my intuition's really good. And so
Yeah,
you'll hear that.
the thing is when you talk with ESTPs and ESFPs, like and kind of like have a deeper conversation with them, that is their focus. Like like often like important to them what their beliefs are, and like how are they providing meaning into their own life.
Mm, absolutely. Well put.
Yeah,
And so do you feel burnt out ever? And how do you cope with that if you do?
I'm never burned out. I'm always trucking. I'm always no. I'm like a machine. Do I feel burnt out? If so, how do you cope with the feeling? So being burnt out is a very common and very normal human kind of experience. Often it comes like because we often become like very fixated on something. So say that it's work and we're fixated on it and we think we need to spend all our time on it. And then we start to feel bad because our identity becomes tied with work. And we say, how come I'm so ineffective at doing this thing that I'm spending all my time on? There must be something wrong with me. But usually when we're burning out, the body's telling us to have a more holistic perspective on our life, meaning let's take a look at your social life. It's trying to whisper to you. Let's take a look at your hobbies. And the funny thing is, like, when you start to engage in things outside of what you focus, you get re-energized and it becomes easier to go back to the thing that you've been fixated on, which could be work, right? Some people, that could even be socializing or just traveling all the time. Like, some people travel all the time and they lose that sense of rootedness and they get burnt out from traveling. So there's something like, the different basic archetypes in life are calling out to you, like the basic archetypes of like structure, spontaneity, purpose, and I think there's like these core themes that they play out, and if you pay attention, um, their body's always asking you to pay attention to them, have like a balance between all these different elements.
Mm, yeah. I find with INFPs, on the topic of burnt out or negative emotions, they are the type most likely to be the hardest on themselves in certain ways. I notice they're very self-deprecating when they are. They just kind of are. They're so hard on themselves, that can cause even more inaction in the SC and TE with certain INFPs. Not all of them, but when they are that certain brand of INFP, it's it's a lot of self-loathing in a person.
Hmm. Yeah, so that's a really good point. Because the focus on the INFP is FI and SI, so it's on that visceral internal process. So like, um, there there's a lot of paying attention to that feeling of like, maybe like when we're burnout, for instance, and like the emotional impact of that. Um, yeah, so I think, yeah, that's really well put. And I've kind of like forgot what I was gonna say, so I'm gonna stop here.
Cool. And so the next question is, how deep can you dive in ideas, and what is your favorite idea?
Mine is that for everything we have two opposites of them. I hope you like my question. I'm INFJ. How deep can you dive in ideas, and what is your favorite idea? I love this question because it's a personal question. And
Mhm.
I feel like my mind's always like diving into ideas. So there's a lot of many different ideas. And I try to find what my focus is. So like, I think finding my focus maybe like is a bit of like an SI kind of SINI kind of thing. Um, and I'm actually kind of like, I one of the major things I'm very interested in is mental health, in terms of how we could develop a sense of calmness and centeredness within ourselves. So that's like a major focus. Another one is what Joyce and I talked about in interviews. So we talk about how I could develop a sense of emotional security, but at a worldwide level. Like, how would a world look like when you could bring the tools from psychotherapy and life coaching and integrate it into different systems? Like, what a different world that would be. I'm always like, pretty excited about it.
Mm, yeah. What is the optimal way in which you can create human value in people? And bringing therapy concepts to people on a regular basis. Because let's face it, most of us need therapy. And so if you make it more of a commonplace thing, it'll be a game changer.
Yeah, I like the idea. I like your idea of opposites, and I actually think about that a lot. Um, I think everything kind of archetypically goes could be boiled down to these archetypes of plus minus, or like yin and yang. And you can see that in typology. And even if you go extremely towards one opposite, you end up in the other. It's kind of like the universe. Like, you go one way in the universe, and you're going to end up on the other side of the universe. And it's a phenomenon you could very much witness. Plus, another thing is like in therapy, when I provide therapy, I'm always very focused on this plus and minus. There's always this and that. So,
Mhm.
for instance, if someone has social anxiety, they may be afraid to assert themselves. So, if they are so focused on asserting themselves, it creates a lot of pressure. So if you teach them to do like to buttress what they say is like to say like, oh, I would like to offer an opinion, or for instance, if someone's talking to validate what they say and then express your opinion, that creates a yin and yang, right? There's a receptiveness and then there's assertiveness, and it's easier to do one when you could do the other.
That's true. Every model, every archetypical model out there is to help us find balance within two opposites. Like what Leon was just saying, there's receptiveness and assertiveness, and finding a way to find a balance between these two opposites in the world almost. And with the cognitive function theory, it's all about figuring out where you're one-sided and figuring out how to balance yourself so you don't get controlled by the things you're best at.
Right.
And yeah, everything.
What I also another if I may, there's another point here is um, balancing out opposites, not simply about middling.
Yeah, it's
Like,
not.
yeah, because that's also another form of pressure. It's
Yes.
more organic, meaning sometimes the more you go in, if you only go in one direction, the other one does not get developed. But if you start to go in the other direction, you start to realize the first direction further. If that
Mhm.
makes sense. Like if you, for instance, with creativity, if you're creative but there's no structure, it's hard to realize that creativity. But when you have the structure in place, the more you actually get further into creativity. So it's not simply about like just finding the like forcing things to be in the middle. It's
Yeah,
more of an expansion process.
absolutely. Yeah. By finding balance, it doesn't mean literally finding the exact 50-50. What it means more is that you can actually become an even better creative if you figure out the slight yang of it, which is the structure piece. And so going like, if I incorporate a little bit of structure, that'll actually amplify the creativity times 1,000.
Hmm.
So a little
Right.
thing.
So basically, when it comes to me and Joyce, it's not like you just take 50% of my channel and 50% of hers. You integrate the material into one.
Yeah, Franken channel right there.
Franken channel, yeah.
Is there an age range where it's likely easier to type a person? Like, is there an age range where a person embodies, manifests strongly his or her MBTI type?
Oh, I think so.
Mm,
Like if
what?
you watch like high school movies, I mean, if back in high school, everyone was like basically playing out their stereotype. I think where free will is basically kind of like when we learn to individuate ourselves. But everyone's like back then, I just feel like everything's like a cliche.
Mhm. That's true. Yeah. An easy age to type people is around the 20s area, perhaps. And so, how do you relate to being a five wing four compared to most other fours and nines?
Oh, if you're talking about me, I don't know my Enneagram type. I'm actually very confused about Enneagram. So kind of like when people come into typology and they say, "Oh, I could be like any sort of type," and that's gonna like annoy me because of my snobbishness regarding that. Um, I'm actually that way when it comes to Enneagrams. Like, oh, I don't know, I could be any of these. So I can't really answer that well.
No worries. Yeah. For some people, Enneagram is perplexing. I think some people may not even have an like for sure Enneagram type two, because there are clear caricatures. So you'll meet people who are definitely certain Enneagrams, but there are certain people who are so hazy. It's like, are you even any of them? That, oh my gosh, I just made so many Enneagram people facepalm. Uh, so are there any famous INFP?
I'm gonna join them in the boycott. I'm walking out too.
No! You drama queen. You wow. So are there any famous INFPs you relate to? Celebrities, artists, authors?
Of course, I'm exactly like them. Every single famous one of them. I'm pretty sure you could always like find elements of of you in a famous version of your type, because you really see how they develop and play out their process. So I don't know if I'm exactly like a lot of them. Actually, like a lot of INFPs, they do like a lot of fiction work, and I don't even read fiction, so I'm like kind of weird INFP in that regards. But like one, of course, I look up to is Carl Rogers, who's a famous psychotherapist. If you look at his psychotherapy, it's like very, very INFP. In that, um, what I like about it, like the main thing I like about it, it's not like I agree with him, because actually I don't necessarily agree with him. I agree with him like 50% of what he does, but the fact that he's willing to get his stuff out there.
Mm,
That's so INFPs. I feel like INFPs have good ideas. It's just like there's kind of like a lack of desire to like kind of like really bring it out there for others. So I think that's like the main thing. Same thing with George Lucas. He's bringing his ideas out there. And the thing with INFPs is that when they do bring their ideas out there, it's often pretty accessible, because they're thinking about how to make this accessible. That's why George Lucas's stuff is pretty understandable. Um,
that's beautiful. Yeah. And sometimes there's not knowing how to make it into the world. So the manifesting, the TESE part can be hard.
right.
Yeah. There's there's also, if you want INFP examples, there's one called Kierkegaard. He's a philosopher. He gets pinned down as an INFJ sometimes. I disagree. I think he's an INFP. Uh, and he's probably a four wing five if you like the Enneagram. I'm too. And he's an existentialist, and he is a good example of the type. Very angsty boy there. So, what do you think of Jung's individuation process? Are you in pursuit of it at this point in your life?
What do I think about Jung's individuation process? Because I have a channel about it and I talk about it, I have to pretend that I have one, but actually I'm just like really poorly developed INFP. The end. That's one of the things I'm actually I'm very interested in Jung's individuation process, and that's why I think typology is key. So some people say like there can't be any categories in life, but the thing is there are categories. So again, it goes back to there are archetypes in human existence. There's straight lines and there's round lines. And one of the straight lines that are out there is that typology exists. And you're not going to realize any of the round lines without the straight lines. So meaning, so by understanding typology, you start to develop, you can find your own organic way of developing into being your individual self. So construction involves like with architecture, like you have the structure in place that's almost like more of the thinking, the systems, and you kind of fill it out with the feeling, and you need both in order to really create your own unique character. That
Mm,
if that makes sense.
yeah, you individuate too by getting into your second and fourth function, maybe sometimes, because that can be the more cautious place. It takes a while for you to feel comfortable there, but
Hmm.
it might teach you how to fully be a you that's less afraid of taking risks in the world, because it's almost riskier to use the functions you're less comfortable with, but it makes for a more complete version of you if done right. If done wrong, you might go down the deep end. Yeah, so Katie asked Leon, what is your favorite thing about Joyce?
Assuming you really know her. Well, what my favorite thing about Joyce, I really can appreciate. I really like her manner. So even when she's off camera, so now I'm reporting how you are off camera, Joyce, is that I find she's very relatable. She's very real, and she wants to form a connection, and that connection is very real. So she's talking to you like a human being. Um, so that's because I like the Joyce off camera. I also like the Joyce that's on camera too.
Cool. Yeah. That's because I'm secretly trying to recruit you into my inner friend circle, Leon.
And the inner friend circles where you reveal your true evil self.
Yeah, you're all a part of my master plan to take over the universe. So, how do SI and NE manifest in INFPs compared to ISFJs?
SI and NE. That's a good question. Um, so I have to kind of think about this one. So SI, NE. So like with INFPs, that's the two middle functions, and with the ISFJ, that'll be the first and fourth, right? So
Mhm.
you can almost look at it as like with SINE for ISFJs, that'll be like their main, like kind of like established reality. And then maybe the second function, third function is kind of like the means to the ends. They're still important and still valued, but they're means to the ends. Whereas for me, like SI and NE, yeah, would be like more of a means. So I look at the third function as kind of like a weekend function, is like how you kind of rest. But rest is important because it helps inform you in a certain kind of way. Extrovert intuition, like yeah, as well. So how do I see this? I feel like ISFJs are very, very like specific when they talk. And for me, it is very hard to handle details. So ISFJs, they lead with introvert sensing, and I see them kind of like as a hero function as like a navigator. So there's a physical navigator. Whereas like with me, I feel like I'm like more of like a navigator of the soul. So like the
Mhm.
SI is more like in service of introverted feeling. So like with your inner emotional world, I like a navigator of your own inner emotional kind of world. And that's where I get very, very like detailed and how I could like subtly adjust something to make things better or to be less stressed out. Uh,
Yeah.
Joyce.
Yeah, sometimes INFPs notice how they don't measure up to their FI ideal, though, and SI sees all the details in which they are not lining up with their FI
Mhm.
idealized desire to be a certain way, and so it can be really hard on them. That's why INFPs, I noticed a lot of them are self-loathing. I know I keep bringing that up, but I really am fascinated where that comes from because it's when I'm alone in a room with them, ooh, they go off. And so you'll find INFPs, some of them are a little less realistic and more idealistic than ISFJs. I've also met some cynical INFPs too, so I'm not like trying to put them all into a category. But I notice ISFJs are way more clear on what is actual reality, whereas INFP might be stuck in a little bit of a dreamland and not know it until it crashes down. So sometimes there's that attraction repulsion dynamic that Leon described at the beginning, where the INFP will be very attracted and then they'll feel repulsed when things don't go according to the FI idealism of it.
Yeah, and a way to look at it is so like SI is a more consistent trait of ISFJs. That's what they do. That's
Hmm.
how they manage things. For me, it's like it has more of an all or none thing. Like either I'm paying attention to a lot or not at all. So
Hmm.
I'm actually not often very aware of when I'm not comfortable, for instance. And it's like, and then they point it out and like how I'm feeling uncomfortable. And then I start to feel uncomfortable because I start to notice how it is.
Mm.
So that's one way. Like I remember like going to restaurants and not like caring so much about like the particular ambience. Like I would enjoy like certain ambiances, but like the ISFJ, like I was going with the ISFJ friend, and we had to like switch like 5 different restaurants because it wasn't like the right, like there's something off to him. And one time I was like very moody, like and then I started to really pay attention to that. So just one time I was like really moody, like I started to complain about the ambience a lot. Like, oh, I noticed this particular detail and it's really annoying. Da 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 da. But often I'm just like not like paying attention.
Mm. Yeah, that makes complete sense. And so
I
Barbara,
feel I feel like oh wait, I feel like we have to answer the extra intuition thing. I feel like ISFJs are secretly like a crazy extrovert intuitive. So often they like to tell these puns. They like puns, so it feels like it's very simplistic. It's like a simple kind of extrovert intuition, but there's something that's like really draws them into it. So as I said, the inferior functions kind of becomes like a fixation. So they sometimes when ISFJs become very fixated on extrovert intuition, as I said, to me it can appear like it's too much. It's almost as if they live in a Dr. Seuss world where like there's no like morality. It's just like a world where anything goes when they get like really sucked into extrovert intuition.
Absolutely. And so Leon's website, I will provide it in the links below after the Q&A. So I'll put Maya and Leon's video with the secure attachments and developing a more secure world. And I'll also provide a link with Leon's writing because it's so good, it'll make you cry like you watched a really good movie.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
As an INFP, do you remember your SI past as mostly the FI feeling of what happened, or do you remember the SE data of the memory FX?
Oh, definitely like the first. That's why I feel like I keep a journal now, because it helps me to remember things. Like what occurred, but I think things kind of gets filtered through like an FI kind of lens. So like I think INFPs could have like almost like a romanticized view of the past, um, either both in a positive and also negative direction.
Cool. And so, how many career changes throughout your life have you had?
Early in my life, I wasn't very focused on career. Um, and I had I had like a ESFP girlfriend then, and she didn't quite understand that. So there, I like when I was with her, she had more of there's something more of an NI focus. It's kind of like strange, but they are actually ESFPs. Like if you really get to know like their inner world, they're like focused on this long-term meaning in their life of what their purpose is, and this is, and then they belong in a gamma quadrant, so the NTJs and SFPs. So it's like there's something more career oriented about it. So she didn't like understand like when I hosted my MBTI groups. For me, that was meaningful to me because it kind of like lacked like a kind of like a centralized kind of purpose. But anyway, like career, I think only recently I know I look very baby faced, but I'm a bit over 30. So but like that only so kind of like finding a career that took place when I'm 30, because I was kind of like forced into it, because I just keep thinking like about multiple options I could be in my life, and not interested in the practicality of life either. So like I think when I start to commit, I said I'm going to get master's in mental health counseling, and then and commit to it. That actually felt pretty good because it gave a lot of clarity. I felt like I was closing doors, and it felt good, like which is not something as like a perceiving type I'm bound to do. I'm bound to kind of like just fritter my life away a bit. But even like during the frittering away was an exploration process, because I I did certain things. So I actually spent a lot of my life in school. So like I call myself a mama because I have two masters, MA. So so past I was a research assistant. I've done teaching assistantships. So yeah, so I would say those are more in line with my career, because down the line I see myself teaching people who want to be future psychotherapists, and also providing psychotherapy. But I've done like a few odd jobs too. Like I worked in a cafe, and I worked in a couple cafes, and then I also worked in a greenhouse. I worked in a furniture store for 2.5 days. But I just can't, I can't really do those kind of things. I think it's more than being an INFP. There's INFPs who can do those things. I have like a bit of ADD too. So that's an issue.
Makes
But
sense.
now I have a place in life where it's comfortable like being ADD, and 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 also being INFP.
Mm-hmm. Regarding your 30-year-old baby face, a
Yes.
lot of Asians drink from the fountain of youth.
Yes.
So they could go trick-or-treating when they're 70 years old and get away with it. It's hilarious.
How do you know about my future plans?
I know the ways that you try to get free chocolate. That's like that's where you get your sugar highs. I know you. And so, why is it hard for INFPs to find a romantic partner? I've noticed this trend with them.
Yeah. And it's also hard to like distinguish like what's me and what's like other INFPs. That's certainly it's true for me, right? Because actually when I think about it, uh, my standards were pretty high. So it's a combination of high standards and not being proactive and hiding away from people. It's not actually very conducive to finding somebody. So I've learned to loosen those things around, but I realize it doesn't compromise what I value. So just like kind of like what I said before, like one opposite kind of furthers the other. When I'm not so fixated on the perfection aspect, then I'm able to get to know someone better, and therefore I could really evaluate like how much we're a match, or like maybe it is people don't necessarily fit into your conception of things. So like maybe I feel like INFPs could have like a conception of someone early. Because someone mentioned about how does the NI critic show up. That's how it shows up. So INFPs NI shows up as a critic, and also like in service to FI. So it's very strong. Like when it comes to a lot of things in life, we're very NE, but then like with that, we're very like we're almost like very perfectionistic in our like idea of what someone should be.
Mm,
So it becomes more like a singular kind of vision, and then there's FI. It's like FI and I kind of pickiness that it doesn't like correspond with reality. You know?
mm. That's really well put. Wow. It's hard in general to find romantic partners too, because it's hard to find good partners.
Right.
And so, what function that isn't a part of your ego stack would you be willing to experience a simulation of for a day or so if it were possible?
I see a lot of questions from this person. Do you have extra intuition? Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, she does. She's an INTP.
Okay. So what function that isn't part of your ego stack would be willing to experience? Would you be willing to experience as a simulation for the day? So, I feel like I play this game a lot. So it's like an extra intuition game. I kind of like step into shoes another type and kind of like act it out just to see how it's like. And I could give convincing presentations. I probably can't do it on camera because I'm gonna feel like a lot of pressure. But like I have an INTP friend and I'll like mimic her ENFJ mom. Like ever crazy. I just do this for fun, or like I kind of like mimic another type. But I like to play this game, so I don't know if like which function that isn't part of your ego stack. SC. I mean, I've done that a lot, like where I kind of like pretend to kind of act as an SE type, and I guess because I that's the most challenging one, I find that the most amusing. It's just, but it's still coming from an extra intuiting place. Like I find this kind of like amusing. See how it's like, I don't know. I think expert sensing. I mean, I feel like I like making fun of extroverted feeling, so I like mimicking that.
I'm out to get you. And so, what would your younger self not believe about your life today?
Oh, a lot of things. I would say so because I feel like, and that's why I like to keep that journal because I get to see like how like limited my worldview could be and how it expands, and we may not be aware because we kind of impose our current perspective and our current values onto the past. But really, like I remember, I felt like, and I've talked about this with Geek Psychology too. We had an interview about it, uh, and in that interview, he says like he felt like he won't like live past a certain kind of age, And I
Mm,
felt the same way. I felt like after college, I would be dead or something like that, or like not necessarily dead, but like a dysfunctional person, maybe like a crazy homeless person on the street. It's because I didn't see like a future then. I felt like my abilities were very, very limited. My self-esteem was very, very low. So I felt like anything I'm doing now is actually literally impossible to my younger self. So I'm very happy to have the experiences after college because they really have proved to be different.
yeah, you surpassed and you outperformed all of your greatest expectations. You're the hero version of the Leon that Leon wanted. If you
Exactly. Yes.
if there were multiple parallel universes about how your life could turn out, you're living one of the best ones. That's quite reassuring.
Right.
You're on the right path, Leon.
Yes. That I like that very and I kind of statement. So I'm basically the hero of my past.
You are, yeah.
Yeah. Actually, it felt really good to hear that.
Mm, yeah. And so, hi Joyce. I know you're a Gallup certified CliftonStrengths practitioner too. Is there a common set of talent and theme strengths associated with INFPs? You know, actually, I haven't had any INFPs yet tell me their Strengthsfinder results. So everything I tell you right now is pure conjecture, but I will pull up Strengthsfinder right now to just see if I would notice any strengths or themes. But Leon, do you know about the instrument while I pull that up?
I have no idea. I don't know what this is.
Yeah, so the Strengthsfinder is another personality tool. It's more used in corporations these days.
Hmm.
And its premise is you learn the strengths that you're good at and you incorporate that more into your life. So they say that living more in your flow state, so your natural strengths actually make you a happier person and more productive person. And so that's the basic premise of StrengthsFinder. And there are 34 themes. And so here, here are the trends I would notice with INFPs. Pure conjecture, by the way. I'll let you know when I actually have data to support this. But I notice with IPs, they tend to score restorative. I used to think that only the introverted thinking type dominants would score it, but actually the FI DOMs also score this to a certain extent. So restorative. And also, I could see INFPs scoring more along the lines of relationship building. So, feeling types tend to score higher on relationship building in general and strategic thinking. And I know that sounds weird because it sounds like something they wouldn't score high in, but that's actually the more introvert dichotomy within StrengthsFinder. So you'll see INFPs probably leaning more on strategic thinking and relationship building, whereas the executing and influencing are more common within either the thinking types or the extrovert types, because it's more broadly based like that. I would also expect an INFP might score a little higher on connectedness too. And what this theme is, it's linked to spirituality. So having some sort of larger spiritual purpose behind things, even if it's not directly a religious thing, but more of a life understanding of the meaning behind it too. I would expect. Conjecture though. Cool. I'm looking for more questions. Hey Leon, glad to see you here. Can you please share some tips for FE DOMs and on how to check in on themselves to sharpen their FI?
Yeah, can you share some tips for FV dominance and how to check in with themselves? Yeah, I think that's an important question. So, um, from my experience as an INFP, I didn't actually know how much a value of that introverted feeling is until I met extrovert feeling types, because and also like other types as well, because I didn't know like because it felt like being centered in knowing how you feel or what you want is very subjective, and such it does it's kind of like useless to the world. But over time, like I realized how important it is. Like if you really know this stuff, you could actually be very helpful to others because if you know what you want and what you like, that's coming from yourself, and yourself is connected to how you best serve others. So yes, it's true. Like with ENFJs, there could be that difficulty in getting to know what they want. So in a relationship, they'd be so focused on the other person, and then the side of them that says, "I didn't like that. I don't like this." It gets shut off, and then that side starts to protest. It starts to like, "Hey, you're not listening to me," and gets really upset. But it's only after the course of the relationship and the ENFJ like really tries to do everything that they can to try to make things work, that they realize it's actually is very important to focus on what you like and what you want as well. And there's tools like for that. So like just like when Joyce was talking about strength finders, like getting to like allow yourself to be like self-indulgent that way, and kind of just know like I want to have an understanding of how I feel, and what my values are and what my strengths are. And there's tools out there. You don't have to always just count on yourself. There's tools out there to help you find these values and your strengths, and to really get to know yourself too.
Absolutely. And so, do you think stereotypes are necessary to draw attention to typology? Because without them, the study would be too technical or boring to the average population?
Uh, kind of. Yes and no. Um, I think stereotype is kind of like it's a word, and it's a tool. So like usually, I mean, linguistically with the word stereotype, it already carries like a negative connotation to it, right? But you could also say that there's importance to categories. And the importance to categories is that it helps you have a shorthand to be able to understand material. So if you want to relate to people, you draw upon categories that are very clearly defined, right? This is the value of thinking. The thinking functions is that they, by nature, they draw like these clear categories so you could understand things. There's heuristics by which you understand things. So if you always make things kind of like long-handed, or kind of like it's not this or not that, it's gonna be hard for someone to understand that material. So there is a purpose to it. And sometimes they're amusing too. So I think um, when people say absolutely no to stereotypes, I think it's the same as taking stereotypes too seriously too. So
Mhm.
like if you could kind of poke fun at it and also not take the stereotype too seriously, then it's helpful too, and to know that the stereotype is also very limited as well. So we can't help but think in terms of stereotypes, but it's also important to get beyond them too. I think if we completely abolish them, it's going to confuse understanding, and yes, it's just gonna confuse people, and or make them think that stereotypes are indeed like very serious, and that's why they should not be talked about.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you can never fully eliminate stereotypes. It's part of the human primal wiring too. For safety, we're programmed that if we see a bush wiggle a certain way, that we assume that a deer or something is gonna. Okay, deers are relatively harmless. Let's say a jaguar is out to kill you. And so stereotypes are quick assumptions we have off of a broad group of people so that we can actually be safe and secure. And it's in our lizard brain, and so we're never going to fully get rid of it. Otherwise, we're getting rid of something that's intrinsically a part of our human wiring to a certain extent. Whereas what we can do with it is use them a little more healthily. So when we figure out that someone's abusing stereotypes, so they're using it as the form of typing, like you can't be an INFP unless you're this melancholic crybaby who cries while writing poems and is an emotional snowflake that wants to be unique, opposed all else. Then that's not a good typing method. And it's riddled with error because that's not getting at the core of type 2, because there's functionalism and there's essentialism. So with type, you're going to want to get to the essential of the person. You're not trying to capture their behavior, which is what stereotypes do. They capture behavior, and it's functional. So you capture the function of a person. But if you want to get to the essence of someone, you have to look at the essentialist view and look at why did they do that? And to do that, you have to look beyond stereotypes. And so stereotypes are good as an entry-level drug, and it gets people talking about type. But one of the ways to have a healthy dialogue is to have real conversations about stereotypes with people of that type. For instance, I'm Asian. Maybe it's good to have a conversation to me about whether or not I truly like rice with every single meal I have, or if that's just an Asian stereotype. And it might hold true across some of us, but not all of us.
Yeah.
So
For me, it's only 90% of meals.
You're only really stereotypical. Yeah. There is some truth to stereotypes too. Sometimes there is a grain of salt to it, but it doesn't say the whole story. So, what advice do you have for younger INFPs, Leon?
What advice do I have for younger INFPs? To know, like, first of all, that you're okay and that you're good. So there's the 16 types, and they're all equal in their value. They all bring something to the table, and that also includes INFPs as well. So the more we could understand our value for what it is, the more we could bring it out to people, because we're going to bring a unique view, because only this is very roughly speaking, one of every 16 people would have that kind of particular insight that we have. Every type has their own insight, but we're bringing in that insight, and if we could bring it out into the world more, you find little ways to get engaged with the world and to kind of bring these ideas to fruition. That's helpful. But even if you don't, to know that who you are it's valuable in itself.
Yay.
Do you have any advice for younger INFPs, Joyce?
I think INFPs are so hard on themselves. They could write a beautiful piece of writing or a poem and then go like, it's trash. And everyone's like, it's amazing. What are you talking about? So I always find that the hammer or the judgment that INFPs have against their own creations are really rough. And I would say put yourself out there anyway, even if you don't think it's perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect for you to put it out. Someone might enjoy the imperfection. And people aren't exactly looking for you to get something completely right. They're looking to feel your essence in some weird woo-woo way. So they can feel your personality through what you create. So if you don't publish what you create, you're not giving people the privilege of witnessing your soul. You're almost depriving the world of your soul in some way. So I'd say put it out there, even if you're not completely 100% fine with it all.
Right. Yeah, and that is a really important question. So I appreciate it.
It is. I find so too. Do you think some types are more prone to imposter syndrome than other types? AJ Trent actually has an article on this, and he says that introvert types are more likely to struggle with imposter syndrome on a whole than most people, but anyone can have it. Any single person can have it. And this is because when you prefer your two introverted functions, so if you're going through, for example, for an INFP, FI and SI, that is a perfectionistic cycle. So you're already hard on yourself. And so when the world confirms how hard you are on yourself, that you're as bad as you thought you were from other people saying it's the crushing weight of two worlds, your internal world and the external world. And that can be soul crushing on some extent. So I have a bias. I think the IP types out of the introverts struggle with it 10 times more if they're FI. Just because when FI is attached to something, it's very easy to take that attachment to a negative bent. Sometimes there can be the mentality of this person can do no wrong, and then there can be a switch where it can be this person can do no right, and that can be applied to yourself. That's like no matter what you do, you're corrupt or you're a bad person, just because what you create is bad and tarnished, and nothing can change your mind. Because a quality of introverted judging functions is they are the final authority to their judgment. So if they think that their work's not good enough, then you can't convince them otherwise because they're already hard on themselves. You can FE encourage them all you want. It's not going to get through unless they want it to get through.
So something I have in terms of the thought about this. I mean, if you think about it at a like even a letter by letter level, like ESTJ, there's something about those letters that just, at least on a surface letter level, make it easier to function out in the world because it's extroversion. You're applying your logic, your tough logic. You're involved in the world in a sensing kind of way. You're more like J-ish as well. So so you could say like an INFP is almost like in the world is a very like a bad. It feels like not a very user friendly avatar if you look at it as a game. So INFP is not a very user friendly avatar in general, but like when you're able to exercise this gifts. So this goes back with the last questions about advice for younger INFPs. You're able to exercise um, your ability to engage with the world. You have a lot of gifts to bring because everything you bring everything else. So I don't want to invalidate anybody's experience because I think like um, in terms of difficulties in life, in the long run, all types have it about equal on average, and but like ESTJ would also have a lot of difficulties too. But I'm just saying like in terms of functioning out in the world, so that's why there might be very much that imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I think all human beings might struggle with this to a certain extent because we're all trying to figure out our way in the dark. There's no instruction manual for how to best live life. And so we're all just kind of faking it until we make it. You come across a fork in the road. One path is well lit and maintained, the other is dark and unkept. Which road do you choose and why?
Oh, this is a good question.
Mhm.
Yeah, this is a really good question. So I need to take a bit of a pause.
Sure.
And when it comes to this, I'm kind of reminded about typology because you almost look at types as there's the well lit direction that people could take, each type could take, and there's also the dark and unkempt direction. And really, light and darkness in itself, like whether one's good or bad, that's a judgment. So one may prefer one or the other. They might prefer the light path or the dark path, but it's all like very relative, I think. Of course, I think if on a surface level, the dark and uncome path just seems more attractive in a way. So, like, if I had to choose, I would just go that direction, or else like my extrovert intuition is just going to be like really bored.
Well, okay, the lesson we learned from this, Leon gets bored easily, so he does interesting things. And so people are asking me, Joyce is dodging invisible traffic. So I accidentally put the questions for this Q&A in a really weird spot. So every time I'm reading, I have to duck. And so that's why. How do you relate to art as an INFP?
How do I relate to art? Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of, I mean, there tends to be a connection between the type and art, but also not necessarily a type thing as well. Um, like often like ESTPs could be a pretty artistic type too. There's a lot of representatives of artists of that type.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Um,
and so oh, go ahead, Joyce.
I actually have an 8 ESTP panel coming up soon, and one of them is a musical artist. So stay tuned for that if you want to see ESTP music. It's a
Yeah.
very distinct style. You can hear it. Although all types do art, they do it differently. There's just a different feel to it. So, yeah, Leon, you can go back to your thing. Sorry.
I think like out of the functions, like FI and SI are very like together they're focused on refinement in itself. So I think the focus on INFP is on a bit of refinement. So that's why there's a bit of a fickleness that's subtle. And you look at like ISFPs or ISFJs, for example, I think they're very naturally this way because, according to the systems I use, including socionics, their strongest functions are FI and SI. So they're very much focused on refinement very naturally, and they're strong at it. But as an INFP, the focus is on refinement, FI and also SI as well. I don't know. I'm quite like obsessively like playing the same pieces over time and trying to like perfecting it. I don't know if that's like a very like introvert sensing kind of thing, but it's like there's like a almost like kind of rhythm to it where I'm kind of like I want to burn that song into my head.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. Um I find it's helpful just to express myself as my own type too, because I notice like with like ESFP singers, there's like because they're strong with extrovert sensing and also strong with extrovert feeling as well, according to socionics, right? There's like more of a force to their voice. There's more of a voice and an expressiveness, as in terms of performance, like being able to fully express, like an actor, like the full range of outer expression. And my voice is a bit more like muted. Actually, this is hard to say because it could just be my voice. Though. So this again, it's like because art is a very personal thing. It's hard to say like what's personal and what's not. Art is very personal for every type too. Like if you talk about art, it doesn't matter what type you are. Is a personal kind of thing. I don't
It's
know if I just like kind of like rambled in any kind of way, but no,
yeah.
now we're here.
I, I agree. I think there might be one exception to that. ISTPs that I interview. So they say that people will call them artistic, but they don't agree with it. They would actually call themselves crafty because their art doesn't express a part of them. They're actually building something. They see it more as skill building competency where they focus on technicalities and getting the technicalities just right rather than as
That's
art.
true. I would agree. So I had an ISTP roommate who he does not like regard how to say is like well, he took a creativity test and he scored extremely low on it, but I feel like the creativity test was actually testing for extrovert intuition. So people didn't think he's going to be an artist, but he actually became an artist as a living. So he makes these pots and he takes these pictures. I remember when he was making a pot, like his focus is on like there's an end to it. He likes making pots because it has a function and you could finish it, right?
Mhm.
And we were talking about that Japanese concept of imperfect art, and so his instructor didn't like his work because he makes things too perfect because he's very technically perfect. And so one time he made a perfect pot and he decided to smash it and has a crack in it, and finally he was able to get an A in his class.
Awesome.
But he's a professional potter.
That is so cool, man.
Mm-hmm.
And so the last question for tonight is when do you feel like you have the most self-respect for yourself?
When?
Yeah.
Exactly 4:09 p.m. every day.
409. Wow.
When do I feel like I feel like I have more respect for myself now? I think, as I said, like opposites could be the same. So meaning, uh, when you have like low self-esteem, could also potentially become narcissistic too, because it's a very much of a self-focus, right? So back
Mhm.
then I would say like I have a bit of both, but everything's like um I try to view things more objectively. So when I get like feedback, I just kind of like view it as like a data point, right? And then I learn and I'm able to adjust myself from there. As a result, I feel like I naturally have like self respect as a result of that because I can appreciate the process of acknowledging I'm not perfect, but also not being down on myself on it. I just see it as like a process.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes what causes people to have self-respect too is living in their purpose or feeling like they're going somewhere in a direction where they want to be going. And so I noticed with some INFPs, this does not apply universally, but I notice they not just any job may fulfill them. So it's like they kind of need kind of a soul-fulfilling job. I don't know how else to put it. It's almost like they want a job that actually like that's why INFPs get the stereotype of being idealistic because in some ways some of them are and like TE DOMs might tell them that is a totally unrealistic job expectation you have. And the INFP is like, well, that won't be possible if you think about it that way. But if you actually try, you might actually be able to, make it happen. And so with the NF, it's always going to be idealistic, sometimes clashing with other type of more realistic types.
Right. And you talk about like a developed INFP, like kind of like actually think about making it happen some sort of way. If I could take some sort of steps
Mm-hmm.
to do it, like that's integrating like more of the other functions.
I 100% agree with that. And so thank you, Leon, for coming out and showing us your INFP self-knowledge and your wonderful psychotherapy analysis of life and your silly, goofy, playful, extroverted intuition that loves poking me with a stick and kind of keeping things interesting by twisting and playing with the concepts around us.
Absolutely. Next time I'll come in with absolutely no expert intuition. I'll just like use expert intuition to pretend I'm like expert sensing.
You're yes. You're the wild card the world didn't know they wanted, but they need.
Ta-da.
And so go check out Leon's channel, Typetips, and I'll also have his website and the video that I did with Leon linked below in a couple of hours too. And thank you, audience members, for asking very original and thought-provoking questions. And I'll see you all in the next stream. And yeah, ciao.